Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name is Simone and I'm Community Manager with the UED Marketing Team. And now, without further ado, let's begin with the introduction. So, in no particular order, Danica, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Simone, and thank you everyone for joining us. Good afternoon. My name is Danica Salazar, and I am Executive Editor for World Englishes for Oxford Languages.
Thank you. Kate, could you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Simone. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Wild, and I am an editor working on the Oxford English Dictionary. And one of my main responsibilities is overseeing the project to update the Historical Thesaurus of the OED, which is one of the things we'll be talking about today.
Thanks, Kate. Let me bring up the presentation.
I'm here to explain the different kinds of information that you can usually find in a typical OED entry. To do this, I'll be showing you an example of an OED entry. So let's go to the OED page right now. As you know, the current edition of the dictionary that is exclusively accessible on OED.com is a living, changing text that is updated every 3 months. Modifications in these regular updates may include further revision to definitions, pronunciation, etymology, headwords, variant spellings, quotations, and dates, as well as new senses, phrases. Revisions and additions of this kind were incorporated into Standing Place when its latest version was published in the OED's June 22 update. Revision information like this can be found by clicking here. And here you can see the entire entry history for this particular entry for Standing Place. Here in the Meaning and Use tab, you can see the different senses of the compound Standing Place, all in chronological order. As an historical dictionary, the OED shows the full history of English over 1,000 years, and this means that even obsolete and disused words and senses are included. As you can see in this entry, Standing Place was first used in English in the late 14th century, in a Middle English translation of a Latin text. This meaning of fallow land is rare and long obsolete, but since it's the very first evidence of Standing Place being used in English, it is still in the entry and it is listed first. The second meaning listed in the entry is a place assigned or reserved for a person or thing to stand in, a place designed to accommodate a person or people standing, and this is what we can say is the more commonly used meaning of Standing Place, which is first attested in the early 15th century and continues to be used until the present day. Now, if you want to see all of the quotations for an entry in the OED, just make sure to click the option here, Show All Quotations. Okay, now that we have all the quotations, you can see that in the quotation paragraph for this sense, there are quotations from every decade from the 15th to the 21st centuries showing the usage of Standing Place in this particular sense from sources as varied as Middle English texts, a 17th century dictionary of hard words, a travel book written by Mark Twain, an early 20th century newspaper, and a 2011 book about the opera. The third meaning of a place where a person is standing appears a few centuries later in 1736, but also continues to be used today. The fourth and newest meaning is used in a particular variety of English. Standing place in the sense a place where one belongs or has established right of residence, a foothold, a home base, and also a sense of identity and independence associated with this, is used specifically in Maori contexts in New Zealand. It is fairly new as it is a 21st century usage dating to the year 2000. As you can see from this example, an OED entry includes all meanings of a word, whether obsolete or current, rare or common, in general use, or specific to a certain part of the English-speaking world. Now, if we go up and go to the Etymology tab, we find an explanation of where the word comes from or how it has been formed in English. In this particular case, we see that Standing Place was formed within English by compounding or putting two words together, which, as you know, is a very productive means of forming new words in English. However, there is an additional element here, as the New Zealand sense we saw earlier is actually a loan translation from the Maori language. This means the use of Standing Place in this specific sense was influenced by translating an existing Maori word, tarangawewe, using English elements that together make a similar meaning. Now, in the pronunciation section, we can see the different ways that standing place can be pronounced. Just like all non-obsolete entries in the OED, this entry has both a British English and US English pronunciation. And since it also has a New Zealand English sense, it also gets a New Zealand English pronunciation. IPA transcriptions are provided, as you can see here, but we also have these play buttons that, when you click it, will play recordings of standing place being pronounced these different ways. So let me just click on these play buttons and show you how that works.
Standing place.
That's the British English pronunciation.
Standing place.
The US English pronunciation.
Standing place.
And the New Zealand English pronunciation. The other pronunciations that you've heard are not synthesized. They are all recordings made by actor phoneticians recruited for each variety who came to OUP's recording facilities in Oxford to read each transcription aloud. The pronunciation section also features relevant pronunciation keys, which explain the key sounds and symbols for each pronunciation model. There's also, so let me just show you what these keys look like. For example, British English, and here are the consonants and vowels and other symbols for US English and New Zealand English as well. At the end of each key to pronunciation, there is a link to a page dedicated to each pronunciation model with a discussion of the rationale for the model, along with major reference sources and potential discrepancies and compromises. So if you click here, then it will open a new window with all of those detailed explanations. The OED has formulated these specific pronunciation models for several varieties of English, which can all be consulted on the OED website, as you can see here. And these models were developed using pronunciation data drawn from varietal dictionaries, knowledgeable native speakers, and online evidence of natural language use. We'll skip the form section for now and come back to it later. We'll go straight to the frequency tab. And here we see the frequency value assigned to standing place. And this section states that standing place typically occurs fewer than 0.01 times per million words in modern written English. How did we come up with this number? This value was calculated by taking the average frequency per million words of standing place from 1970 to the present day, with values being derived from Google Books Ngrams, a data set based on a corpus of several million books printed in English between 1500 and 2010, as well as a corpus of 20 billion words compiled by Oxford Languages, which covers the period from 2017 to the present and is mainly compiled from online news sources and covers all major world varieties of English. Standing place has also been assigned to frequency band 2. And what does this mean? Each non-obsolete word in the OED is assigned to a frequency band based on its overall frequency score. Bands run from 8, very high frequency words, to 1, very low frequency. And this scale is logarithmic. Words in band 8 are around 10 times more frequent than words in band 7, which in turn are around 10 times more frequent than words in band 6. Now, band 8 contains the most common English words, such as determiners, pronouns, principal prepositions, as well as the verbs be and have, other auxiliary and modal verbs, other most common semantic main verbs, such as do, make, take, use, and basic quantifying adjectives like all, some, more, and one. Now, one step down, band 7 includes the main semantic words which form the substance of ordinary, everyday speech and writing. Standing place is several steps below that in band 2, which comprises words that are almost exclusively not part of normal discourse. So many of the words in band 2 are technical terms or terms from specialized discourses or specific varieties of English. Now, this makes sense for standing place, as it is most often used only when talking about theater or sports venues, or in its particular Maori sense in New Zealand English. Now, you can click on this link here which will take you to this page, which tells you gives you more information about the OED frequency bands, how it's calculated, and what the different bands mean and what kind of words you can expect to find in each band. So as we've seen in the short demonstration, the OED shows us the individual histories of the words that form the English language. But sometimes these histories can prove surprising. One classic example is the interjection OMG, which most of us would consider a very modern expression. And indeed, the OED entry for it states that it's most frequently used in the language of electronic communications. However, OED research has shown that the origins of OMG are not as recent as we might expect. On 9 September 1917, retired Admiral John Jackie Arbuthnot Fisher penned a letter to a young Winston Churchill. In a sarcastic tone, he drew his letter to a close with, "I hear that the new order of knighthood is on the tapis. OMG, oh my God, shower it on the Admiralty." Since its pioneering usage by Fisher, OMG did not resurface until the latter half of the 20th century, but still, a letter addressed to Winston Churchill, written by a British admiral, is forever enshrined in the OED as the first known written usage of an expression we usually relate today to excited teenage girls. Now, as the OED's editor for World Englishes, I am particularly interested in documenting how English words are used in different parts of the world. Now, in this part, I'll briefly show you some examples of how the OED can help researchers answer a variety of questions on how English is used across the globe. It can aid in investigating questions like, which words are used in specific English-speaking countries or region? So we can go back to the OED and I'll show you how we can answer that question. If we go to advanced search, if you scroll down and look at the different categories on this list, we can see the words that belong to the different varieties of English recorded in the OED. If we go over to these regional English categories, so we can use these different categories to see which words belong to different varieties of English as documented in the dictionary. Say, for example, if we click on African English, and we can click on the drop down here and refine that even further and see that African English comprises over 1,000 entries in the OED, and it also includes South African English with 962 entries, East African English with 95, and West African English with 62, and that also includes Nigerian English as a subset. Another question, what are the dominant semantic fields in a specific variety of English, and what do they say about the culture of the community that speaks this variety? So again, go to advanced search. And then if we go to language of origin, then expand Indo-European, then expand Indo-Iranian, and then select Indo-Aryan, a category which includes words in the OED that originate in Indian subcontinent languages. We see that there are 1,465 entries in the dictionary that come from languages such as Bengali, Hindi, Sanskrit, and Urdu. Now, if in this search we scroll down to the subject categories, which we have down here, we see that 308 of these words, or 21% of these words, belong to the subject category religion and belief. And further limiting the search results to this category by clicking on it and examining the list that this brings up reveals the nature and significance of these South Asian words. So even if we just quickly scroll up and down the list, we can see that the words in this category are words relating to principles of Buddhist and Hindu philosophy and mythology, or to specific practices of these religions, such as yoga and religious festivals. Many of these words have gained such currency in English that they have developed extensions of meaning and become part of everyday vocabulary. So we've seen there some words such as avatar, guru, juggernaut. We have karma here, mantra, nirvana, and pandit. Now, next question. Which languages have had the most influence on a specific variety of English? Again, using advanced search, this time, again, going to regional English. And this time, selecting Caribbean English. Then going up to language of origin, we see that Caribbean vocabulary mostly comprises words of English origin, as well as loan words from European languages such as Spanish and French. So if you click on Indo-European, you see that there are many Caribbean borrowings coming from Romance languages, such as French, which is a Gallo-Romance language, and Spanish and Portuguese, which are Ibero-Romance languages. But Caribbean words in the OED also includes words that have been borrowed from African languages, also some Indian languages, and indigenous languages of the Americas, and Caribbean Creoles. Another question, how can certain words show the historical links between different geographical areas? So if we go back to a previous advanced search, we see that there are 7 Caribbean English words that come from Indian languages. So we can bring up the list of them by clicking here and selecting this category. So there are only 7 words, so they may be just a few of them right now, but they are evidence of the linguistic impact of Indo-Caribbeans and Caribbean English, a result of the history of the indentured laborers from India in the wider subcontinent who were brought by the British, Dutch, and French during the colonial era from the mid-19th century to the early 20th century, and whose descendants form an important part of Caribbean society today. Okay, next question. Is a word really a coinage in a specific variety of English or a preserved archaic use from another variety? One simple but fundamental question for lexical studies of World Englishes that can be answered by simply consulting an OED entry is whether a word or sense that has been found to be characteristic of a particular variety is indeed a new word or sense that developed within this variety. So one typical example of a word that many people consider to be unique to Philippine English is comfort room, which is one of the most commonly used terms in the Philippines to refer to a toilet. However, the OED entry for comfort room contains evidence of this compound being used in the United States as early as 1886, as you can see here, continuing to be used by Americans during the early years of the American occupation of the Philippines, thus giving an indication of when the term may have been picked up by Filipinos, and then falling out of use in America in the mid-20th century and remaining in current use only in the Philippines. The OED provides convincing proof that comfort room is not a Philippine coinage, but rather an archaic usage in American English preserved in contemporary Philippine English. Final question, how have spelling conventions changed for certain World English words? So to answer this, we look at another OED entry, gotch, as an example, and go to the form section that we skipped earlier here. This section shows the different ways that a word has been spelled throughout its history. This is particularly interesting for loanwords that have been borrowed into English from other languages, as it usually takes time before firm spelling rules for such loanwords are set. For instance, gotch, a Canadian slang term for underpants, which traces its origins to the Ukrainian language. This was borrowed from the Ukrainian word for trousers, gachi, and combined with the English s plural ending to form the variants gonchis, gotchis, gotchis, ginchis, and gitchis. These were then transformed through back formation to the variants gonj, ginj, gitch, gonj, and gotch. The choice of variant depends on which part of Canada a speaker is from. There seems to be a preference for gotchis in Ontario, for gitch and gotch in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and for gonj and other variants with N in Alberta and British Columbia. Thank you very much.
Today I'm going to talk about the Historical Thesaurus and how to search and navigate it. The Historical Thesaurus is a diachronic thesaurus, so it shows you not just synonyms of a word, but synonyms and other related words as they have developed over time. And unlike in many other thesauri, the words are arranged in a structured hierarchy. You can access the thesaurus from any OED entry which has a Historical Thesaurus link. So I'm in the OED entry for author, and I can see that I'm at Sense 1, the writer of a book or other work, and there's this link to the Historical Thesaurus underneath it. So I'll click on that to open the module. Now I can see all the synonyms of writer or author arranged in chronological order, going from booker and writer in Old English through to maker, inditer, pen, and so on. And I can click on any of those words to go to their OED entry. So for example, I'll click on writer, and now I'm at the equivalent sense in the entry writer. I'll go back to author now. If I want to explore the Historical Thesaurus category in more detail, I can click on either on the category heading here, or by scrolling down, and at the bottom of the list, go to the View in Historical Thesaurus link. I'll click on that now. So now I'm in the Historical Thesaurus category for writer or author. And on the right-hand side are all the words in the category, and on the left-hand side is the thesaurus taxonomy or hierarchy. The words are organized chronologically by default, but you can choose to look at them in alphabetical order if you prefer, like this. And you can continue to look at other related categories by exploring the taxonomy on the left-hand side. So I can see I'm in the section writer or author, and looking up the hierarchy, I can see that writer or author is within the category literature, which is within the arts, which is within leisure, which is within society. And you can click on any of these categories to explore those further. You can also look at the subcategories of writer or author. So here are lots of different types of writer or author. For example, I might want to look at the different words that have been used to refer to inferior writers. So I'll click on this category, inferior writer. And now on the right-hand side, I can see all the words in this category, all the different terms that have been used to refer to inferior writers over time: scribbler, paper blurrer, bywriter, feather driver, squitterbook, and so on. And you could click on any of those to go into the OED entry. One thing I just wanted to note is that the Historical Thesaurus is unlike many other thesauri in that it includes categories that contain only one word in them. So, for example, if we go down after the category for inferior writer, there's this category, interpolator of spurious words or passages, and it only has one word in it, foister. Some people are surprised to find categories like this, as they're used to thinking of thesauri as synonym dictionaries. So they're a bit surprised that there are categories which don't have synonyms in them. But the Historical Thesaurus is much more than a synonym dictionary. It's more of a classification of the language. I'll go back to the OED entry for author now. we can see that it's not just the main sense of author that is linked to the historical thesaurus. Any sense that has a historical thesaurus link like this is linked to the thesaurus. So sense 1b, the writings of an author, is in the historical thesaurus category, writings of an author. Sense 2, the editor of a journal, is in the historical thesaurus category, editor of journal or newspaper. And sense 3, which refers to a type of card game, is in the historical thesaurus category, children's or simple games, which is within card game. And again, with any of these, I could click on the words to go to the OED entry, or click on the category heading, or the View in Historical Thesaurus link to go to that category in the Historical Thesaurus. So now I'm in this different section of the thesaurus relating to card games. Another thing worth mentioning here is that not all historical thesaurus categories consist solely of synonyms. Some do. So in that section we were looking at for writer or author, all the words meant writer or author and were broadly synonymous. But in this section, the words beggar my neighbour, old maid, happy families, and so on aren't synonyms as such. Rather, they're all different types of children's card games. And there are lots of categories like this in the historical thesaurus. I've shown you how to get to the historical thesaurus from an OED entry, and that's often one of the easiest ways of accessing it. But you can also reach it through the OED homepage. So on the homepage, if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link to the historical thesaurus. I'll click on that, and that takes me to the historical thesaurus homepage, which gives you a description of the thesaurus and a link to more information. And then it shows you here all the main categories in the thesaurus, which are divided into 3 broad sections: the world, the mind, and society. And clicking on any of these sections will take you into the thesaurus structure that we saw before. So, for example, if I go to society and click down, go into leisure and click here, and then I'll click on the arts and go to literature and go to writer or author and select the nouns there, and then that's me back in that section for writer or author that we looked at before. So that's a way of getting into the historical thesaurus by browsing. You can also search the historical thesaurus using the same search functionality as you would for the dictionary. And you can do this using the usual search bar wherever you see this. And there are a few different options here. So if I search for author, so one way of doing this is just to do a regular search for your word. And then you can, there are historical thesaurus results. You can click on the results in the historical thesaurus like this. Or when you get your search results, click on Advanced Search and go to the Historical Thesaurus tab, and that gives you the same results. Or another way is to do the same search, but select Historical Thesaurus from the drop-down like this. And that takes you to these same results. So that's just a few different ways of getting the same results, which is a set of results for author in the historical thesaurus. And what you can see now is all the historical thesaurus categories which contain a sense of the word author or a sense of a word or lemma with author in it, like co-author or hack author. In the left-hand column, you see the meaning of each sense. And in the right-hand column, you see the historical thesaurus category in which that sense is classified, along with a sample of some other synonyms or related words and a link to view that category in the historical thesaurus. So, for example, this first one is a particular sense of author, meaning a person who authorizes or incites an action. This is an obsolete sense. And it's in the Historical Thesaurus category, one who incites or instigates. Or here's a sense of the verb author, meaning to state, declare, or say. And it's in this Historical Thesaurus category. Or we can go down and see the sense of author that we were looking at, the writer of a book or other work. And it's in the category writer or author. And you can view it in the Historical Thesaurus. So I'll just do that for this one. And that takes us back to that category we were looking at. I'll go back to the search results now. And one thing you can do with these search results is filter them using the filters on the left-hand side. So say, for example, I'm only interested in senses of the noun author. I'm not interested in verbs. I can just filter using the nouns filter here. And now I'm just looking at noun results. Or I could use any of the other filters for language of origin or regional English and so on. Filters are especially useful when searching categories rather than words. And you can do this by clearing your search and starting with an empty search. So I'll just show you how to do this. One option is just to clear the search bar like this. So just delete what's ever in there and press update. Or another way of doing exactly the same thing is just go to advanced search and go to the Historical Thesaurus tab. And so you've now got a sort of empty search where essentially you're looking at all the senses in the OED that are linked to the Historical Thesaurus. And you can now apply filters to those. So let's pick a different example. Let's say I'm interested in words in the semantic field of excitement. So I start with this complete list of all the senses that are in the Historical Thesaurus, and I'm now going to filter down just to the ones that are in the category excitement. So I will click select category. I'll key in excitement. And what I see now is all the Historical Thesaurus categories that have excitement in the heading. And I'll just pick this general category, which is excitement within the category emotion. And now what I see is a list of all the senses that are in the Historical Thesaurus category excitement or any of its subcategories. Like there's one that's in the category in a state of excitement, or one that's in full of excitement, and so on. And now I can use the filters to further limit my search to particular things I'm interested in. So let's say I'm interested in the language of origin of particular words in the semantic field of excitement. I want to know which words relating to excitement have Latin as a language of origin. So I'll leave the excitement filter on, so I'm just looking at that category. I'll go down to language of origin and select Latin. And now I can see all the words related to excitement that come from Latin. So aerated and agitable and animate and so on. And I could do this for using any of the other filters. For example, if I was interested just in colloquial and slang words relating to excitement, or words relating to excitement used in British English, for example. And with any of these results, I can always click View on Historical Thesaurus to look at the category in more detail. Thank you for listening. I hope that's provided you with some useful information about how to search and use the Historical Thesaurus.
We've already got some questions submitted, so thank you people sending in questions. So the first question that we've got there, it's this one here. Would the panel summarize their personal interests, specialities, words that surprised them when they learned them? I know any logophile could talk about this for hours. I just want to get a flavor for the personalities of the panel.
Right. Well, I guess I can start. Yes, so as I've explained earlier, my particular sphere of interest and what I work on in the OED are what we call are words that belong to what we call world Englishes, so different varieties of English spoken in different parts of the world. So I myself speak one of these varieties. So it's not really, so what surprised me are not really, like kind of exotic words. It's actually the more common words and how they're used so differently in depending on where you are that really surprised me. So like I speak Philippine English, which is much more based on American English. So when I first moved here to the UK, I was really surprised that people don't use, for example, the adverb thrice as a common word. I would just, in my normal speech, say things like, oh yeah, I really like that restaurant. I've been thrice this year. And then people went, what? But because in the Philippines, to us, it just makes sense to say once, twice, and thrice, but apparently, and as the OED says, thrice is now considered to be an archaic word in standard British and American English, but in my variety in the Philippines, it's still a common everyday word. So it's something that you'll hear everywhere you go. So it's things like that. So for example, when we did an Indian English project a few years ago, I found out that in Indian English, sometimes the word hotel can just mean a restaurant, so it's not, so you could go to a hotel expecting that you can sleep there, but in fact you can just eat there. So it's a very common word that we all think that we know how to use, but apparently it depends on where you are. And I also find it very interesting to see, so those differences are remarkable, but also the commonalities are very interesting to me as well. So I find that every World English project that we do, no matter which part of the world we go to, there are categories that keep on reoccurring. So we always do food terms. So I love defining dishes, finding out how they're made so I can write a good definition for them. And there's words, we use different words for things like small local shops, for instance. So there's a different word for that in Canada, different word for that in India, and we have one in the Philippines. So even surprisingly specific categories like gifts that you bring after coming back from a trip abroad, for example. So we have a word for that in Philippine English, pasalubong, and we've just drafted a Caribbean word for that, at Guyanese term, prags, and we're about to do to write an entry for that from borrowed from Japanese, omiyage. So those words. So it seems like there are certain semantic categories that keep reoccurring in different varieties of English, and that they tend to have specific words for them. So I find it fascinating learning about those words. Kate?
Well, I have a similar experience. I'm Scottish, and you're, Danica, talking about your experience with thrice. I have a similar one with out with, which I think it was only working in the OED that I realised that. So for me, it's perfectly normal to say, well, we'll discuss this out with this conversation, for example, but apparently that's just Scottish, and that was very interesting for me to understand this. But in terms of my own particular interest, I'm not sure what this is going to say about my personality, but I'm very interested in grammar and syntax, and some of the words that I've actually really particularly enjoyed working on in the OED are the sort of grammatical words. So I revised the entry have, the verb have, and that was actually just really fascinating seeing it, how it developed from the main verb, I have a house, I have a pen, and how the use as an auxiliary verb, like I have talked to him earlier or something, how that developed, and you kind of see the semantic progression. So very interested in that aspect of language. And then in terms of the historical thesaurus, I love looking at semantic fields, how sort of patterns, how you can kind of explore patterns in semantic fields. I don't know if can I share my screen a moment? I'd quite like to share my favorite semantic category. That's what I thought it'd be a nice one to show. So this is such a lovely category in the historical thesaurus. You can look at all the different words for terms of endearment over time, darling and dear, sweetheart, all the way up to the present day. And one of the interesting things is you can kind of see the different sort of metaphorical patterns, the lots of words that come from names of animals like lamb, pug, and so forth. Lots of words relating to sort of sweet food or kind of sweetness. Various words for flowers or types of jewels, and so it's just really interesting to just explore how these concepts like this have been expressed in different periods. So anyway, I invite everyone to go and have a look at this absolutely lovely category if you have a moment. It's terms of endearment.
Right, thank you both. I have to say that I particularly enjoy the terms for inferior writing.
You see, those were also very good fun.
Okay, well, thank you both for the answers. The next question we've got here is this one. I wonder how much evidence of spelling variations it takes to make the variant list.
Do you want me to ask that? Yeah, that's a really good question. It's, the variant forms, variant spellings lists are based on the sort of same research that goes into creating and editing OED entries. So all the research we do, finding evidence from manuscripts, books, newspapers, magazines, journals. So all of that information informs the findings about how the words have been spelled in different periods as well. And we look at other historical dictionaries as well, and just as many sources as possible to get the fullest list possible. And they are, extremely useful lists, especially for kind of carrying out historical research in earlier periods, knowing the kind of variation that's possible at different times. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Yeah, it doesn't take much evidence, even if actually there's one attestation of a spelling, especially for much earlier periods of English, like Old English and Middle English. We don't have a huge corpus of text surviving from that time. So there are some variants where we have just one or two or a handful of examples, but we still consider them to be sufficient evidence of that variant, and that makes it into the variants list. And if we can't find any current examples, then we would just mark them as obsolete. But they will still make it into the variants list.
Thanks both. The next one we've got here is this one. I just saw that the OED is working on a Singaporean English variety in the World English Hub. Is there any way to contribute to it as a member of the public? I am Singaporean. Well, I've asked my colleague Joe to put a link to where contributions can be submitted, but I've just put the question there in case you want to add anything to it, Danica.
Well, nothing apart from thank you for wanting to contribute. So please see the click on the link that my colleague will share with you now and send us your suggestions. So we did a Singapore English update a few years ago, but now the OED is currently moving to a new way of updating different varieties of English in the dictionary. So instead of doing large updates every few years for every variety, we're going to do smaller updates for all varieties, but doing them annually. So you can expect to see at least a few new Singapore English words in at least one of the OED's quarterly updates. So we're certain. So given that, we're really keen to receive suggestions from especially since you're a Singaporean, you're a speaker of the variety. So any suggestions you can give us for new words to add will be very much welcome. So thank you.
Thank you. The next question we've got is this one. Suppose I want to know at what date a US usage entered UK English. How would I approach that?
Can you do it?
I can. Yes, I'm trying to think of an example entry to look at. I mean, I think the main thing we'd want to look at is go to the entry you're thinking about and look at the quotation paragraph. And the quotations, you'll be able to see this sort of regional variety there, and the labelling might give you some indication about whether it was originally US, for example, or, sorry, I can't remember which way around the question was, originally in one particular variety. There wouldn't be a precise date. That's not the sort of level of granularity. We wouldn't give that level of granular detail, but you would be able to get an indication from a combination of the labelling and the information in the quotation paragraph. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Thank you. We've got now a search question. So can we search for the entries which are by a specific author? How do we present new editions?
Can I just clarify the question? Do you mean an entry, so a word that was coined by a particular author, like first used by a particular author? I'm not sure. Sorry, I might have misunderstood the question.
Kate, the person has just added that it's about any users quoted.
So yes, because you can search, using advanced search, you can search for quotations, you can search for entries that contain quotations by particular authors. So if you go into the quotations tab in advanced search, you can select Shakespeare, and you'll get all the quotations, all the entries that contain quotations by Shakespeare. And if you select, there's an option to select first in entry. So if you select Shakespeare and show that Shakespeare was the first author in that entry, then you'll see all the entries that have Shakespeare as the first quotation author, which sort of suggests that Shakespeare, may have coined them. Obviously, we're always uncovering additional evidence, and somebody may have, used it, and that's the earliest evidence we have at the moment. But yeah, you'll be able to find the information that way.
Yeah, I think there's a question that actually very much relates to that one, which is this, for example, how do we see the list of words Shakespeare coined?
Yeah, here I am. I'm on the advanced search page on the quotations tab, and I can select. So I could either enter the quotation author, but because the most common authors are just listed there, and funnily enough, Shakespeare's at the top. So this now gives me all the entries that have a quotation by Shakespeare. But then I can also, under quotation date, if you click first in entry and then update, this now gives all those entries where Shakespeare, a quotation by Shakespeare is the first in the entry. So coined by Shakespeare, like Abbey Wall, or so I'll just click on this one, a brook verb, and yeah, you can see that this obsolete word meaning endure, tolerate, abide, the first quotation is by Shakespeare. And you can see that there's nearly 3,000 of these. So, and you could do that for any of these other authors, or you can keep clicking to see more. Or if there's a particular author that you're not seeing listed there, you could just enter the name. So I could put in, if I want to find out Jane Austen, for example, and update. And I'll just make sure I've still got first in entry. And these are the ones that have a first that Austen coined. Like a bath bun, for example, that's quite a fun one.
Oh, wow.
Which sounds very appropriate for Austen. A round yeast bun containing currants and topped with icing or sugar. So there you go, which you used in a letter.
Thanks, Kate. And the person who asked the previous question had actually sent another comment as means of clarification, which I missed before. So sorry for that, but thank you for clarifying your question. But I think it's what you addressed. Is I'm wondering what words in the dictionary are cited rather than originated. Right. So now we've got one about whether there is any Maltese English there.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's a great question, because if you look at my to-do list right now, actually, what I'm going to do tomorrow is to start building the Maltese English word list, because we're actually doing, we're publishing an update on Maltese English on an OED quarterly update that's coming up. So that's something that we're currently working on right now. So the answer is it's not there yet, but it will be very soon. So I advise that you stay tuned and yeah. So that's definitely something that we're working on right now.
Very timely question then.
Very timely question.
Right. Thank you. The next one is this one. The sole purpose of language is communication. Communication not only horizontally, that is among contemporary people around the world, but also vertically, that is down through the ages, as in understanding, say, Shakespeare or Chaucer today. While growth and change in language are inevitable, would it not behoove the OED to lean less toward description and more toward prescription in words, usage, spelling, and even pronunciation?
Don't know if you want to ask that, or I could.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that, because the OED is a historical dictionary. So its main purpose is to show how the English language has evolved in 1,000 years of its history. So if you're going to lean towards prescription and say, this is how you need to use the language, and that will not be in line with that remit of the dictionary. And also then, if we prescribe, then that means that we're taking on certain rules. But the question, especially from my perspective as working on different varieties of English, being a person who my whole life has been told that I'm not speaking English correctly because I speak it with a different accent than what is known to be standard, then whose rules are we talking about? Which rules are we going to prescribe? So that's why I think having a dictionary like the OED is important, so that it really shows that all the different varieties of English from different time periods, from different parts of the world where the language is spoken, they are all valid. They're all part of the history of the language. And if we start prescribing things, then that means that only certain points of view will be taken into account. And I don't think that goes with what the OED is there for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree, and I think what we could give some examples of uses that many people object to, and in an OED entry that the sort of attitudes to them might be reflected, but we, as the editors, we take a neutral stance and we're showing the history of the term. And I think it's really think that's something fascinating about working in a historical dictionary. You can see that things that people object to, actually they go back, things like of, for have, like should of, goes back to, I don't know what, it's quite a few centuries, isn't it? And, you can find uses in, supposedly, authors, very respected authors. So I think kind of actually seeing that history puts it in context that that these things that people might think are just kind of modern inaccuracies actually have a long history.
Yeah, and also even usages that we find totally normal today, like let's say the use of kid to mean a child, at a certain point in the history of English was quite shocking to people. Like when you say, "Oh, but your child is not a goat. Why are you calling them a kid?" But now nobody thinks twice about. No one would prescribe against kid now. So we, working on as editors on historical dictionary, it's even clearer to us that all of these rules really, they are subject to change, and they're not as set in stone as we believe them to be.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but I think we've got time for one more question. And actually, Kate, there is this one that is for you, Dr. Wild. Regarding the verb to have, one uses a syntactic substitute for must, as in I have to go now. In this use, the final consonant is devoiced, at least in American English. This occurs whether the word is has or have. Is this true in other variants of English, and is it known how this developed historically? A similar change occurs with the S in use, as in I used to go there frequently.
This looks like a very interesting question. It might be one I need to investigate offline. I will say that not really the section about the pronunciation, but in terms of the actual the usage of that particular meaning of have, as in where it means must. There is a very interesting. If you go to the OED entry for have, it's sends 42A. There's a note explaining how that usage developed, where originally it kind of developed from the sense of possession, like to have something to do, and then through sort of changes in word order, that developed into have to do something, which I think is really like a really fascinating development. But the other aspect of the question about the final consonant, I probably need to investigate that separately, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. So we will unfortunately need to wrap up. I would like to thank you, Danica and Kate, very much for the presentations and for the very interesting answers to all the questions, and thanks everyone who submitted questions. So I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. So thanks, and from us from now is a goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.